Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku rose as a pharaoh ruling Egypt with Quirk powers. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The sun over Thebes was a relentless god. It beat down upon the mud brick homes and gilded temples with an oppressive, personal fury, baking the very air until it shimmered. The Nile, the lifeblood of the two lands, flowed wide and sluggish, its surface a blinding sheet of silver gold. From its banks rose the scent of wet silt, dark and fertile, a constant promise of life that mingled with the city's cacophony. The sharp tang of spices in the marketplace, the dusty smell of baked bread, and the ever-present, almost imperceptible fragrance of incense drifting from the great temple of Ammonius-Ra. In the shaded portico of a modest scriptorium, tucked away from the main thoroughfare, a young man named Izuku Midoriya was oblivious to it all. The world, for him, had shrunk to the size of a papyrus scroll laid across his lapboard. His brow, beaded with sweat that threatened to drip onto the fragile sheet, was furrowed in concentration. His fingers, stained with the permanent shadow of black and red ink, held a reed pen with a surgeon's delicacy. He wasn't transcribing a merchant's ledger or copying a prayer for a wealthy client. He was engaged in his own private, sacred ritual, analysis. Before him, practicing in the sun-drenched courtyard, was a member of the pharaoh's own Medjay guard. The man's name was Kenji, and his heka was a simple but effective one. Izuku's pen flew across the papyrus, his hurried hieroglyphs and annotations forming a complex diagram. Heka, sand skin. Source, God Geb, the Earth Father. Activation, conscious. User draws ambient sand and dust particles to their skin, forming a dense, flexible armor. Strength, highly resistant to cutting and piercing attacks. Observe deflecting a bronze spearhead with minimal damage. Effective against fire-based heka, smothering small flames. Weakness, water. The armor becomes heavy, mud-like sludge when saturated. Slows the user considerably. A direct, powerful water heka, a blessing of Sobuk, would likely dissolve it instantly. Notes. Requires a constant source of sand or dust. In the stone-paved halls of the palace or during the inundation, its effectiveness would be drastically reduced. A clever opponent could exploit this. A small, satisfied sigh escaped Izuku's lips. He added a final sketch of the Medjay stance, noting how his weight shifted just before activating the heka. It was all vital information. All of it. In a world where divine power, heka, was everything, knowledge was the only weapon available to the unblessed. And Izuku was painfully, profoundly unblessed. Since birth, he had been a vessel empty of the god's favor. While other children manifested their first sparks of heka, a flicker of light, a stone that hovered for a second, a flower that bloomed in their palm, Izuku had remained mundane. A blank space in the vibrant tapestry of their society. The priests had examined him, chanted prayers over him, and finally declared him devoid of a divine connection. In the rigid hierarchy of Egypt, this was a sentence of social invisibility. The blessed, those with heka, were the warriors, the priests, the artisans, the nobles. They were the architects of the world. The unblessed were the foundation upon which they stood, the laborers, the servants, and the scribes who recorded the deeds of their betters. His master, a kind but weary old scribe named Benipe, had taken him in as an orphan, teaching him the intricate art of the written word. Izuku had excelled, his mind a rapacious sponge for knowledge. But while other apprentices practiced their letters, Izuku practiced observation. He filled scroll after scroll with his detailed studies, a desperate attempt to understand the power he could never possess. It was his secret shame, and his greatest passion. He called it his heka analysis for the future, a foolishly hopeful title for what most would consider a collection of useless, borderline heretical, notes. Still scribbling in that pathetic little book, Deku? The voice was sharp and explosive, like flint striking steel. Izuku flinched, his pen jerking and leaving a small black smear on his work. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. The crackling heat that washed over the portico was announcement enough. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, framed by the harsh sunlight. He was everything Izuku was not, tall for his age, with a shock of ash-blonde hair that seemed to defy the humidity, and eyes the color of carnelian, blazing with an arrogant fire. He was the son of a high-ranking noble, destined for command in the Pharaoh's army. And his Heka was magnificent. It was called the Blessing of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of destruction and vengeance. His palms, even at rest, seemed to shimmer with latent power. When he willed it, they erupted in concussive blasts of force and fire, accompanied by a deafening roar. It was a Heka made for war, a gift of overwhelming power that perfectly matched his personality. Flanking him were two other young nobles, their expressions a mixture of sycophantic admiration for Katsuki and casual disdain for Izuku. "What is it this time?" Katsuki sneered, snatching the scroll from Izuku's lap before he could react. "Analyzing the Heka of a palace guard? What's the point? You could study them for 1,000 years and you'd still be a pebble. A useless, unblessed Deku." Deku. The name he'd given Izuku as a child. A clever, cruel play on his name that meant one who can do nothing. It had stuck like a brand. "Give it back, Kaken," Izuku mumbled, his face flushing with heat that had nothing to do with the sun. He stood up, but he was a head shorter than Katsuki and possessed none of his coiled, predatory grace. "Kaken?" Katsuki let out a short, barking laugh. He unrolled the scroll, his crimson eyes scanning the detailed notes. "Sandskin? Weakness, water. Ooh, how terrifyingly brilliant. Are you going to defeat him by splashing him with your tears?" His cronies snickered. Izuku's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "It's not for fighting. It's for understanding. If you know how things work, you can." "You can what?" Katsuki interrupted, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. He pushed a finger into Izuku's chest. "You can't do anything. Don't you get it? The gods decide who matters. They looked at you and they gave you nothing. All this scribbling is just you refusing to accept your place. You walk around muttering about heroes and saving people. How can you save anyone when you're less than no one?" He held the scroll out. A small, ominous crackle, like dry wood popping in a fire, emanated from his palm. The scent of burnt sugar and ozone filled the air. Izuku's eyes widened in horror. "No, Kaken, please. That's a month's worth of work." "Then it's a month wasted," Katsuki said, his expression hardening. A miniature explosion, no bigger than a fist, blossomed in his hand. The papyrus instantly blackened, curled, and disintegrated into a cloud of fluttering ash. Izuku stared at the black motes drifting in the sunlight, his heart sinking into a cold, heavy pit in his stomach. All that work, all those hours of quiet observation, the one thing that made him feel like he had a purpose, gone in a puff of smoke. A tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. Katsuki saw it, and his lip curled in disgust. "Pathetic. Stop trying to be something you're not. Your place is in the dust, Deku. Learn it." He turned, shoving past Izuku and stalking off into the crowded street, his followers trailing in his wake like jackals. Izuku was left standing alone in the portico, the phantom smell of scorched papyrus in his nostrils, the familiar sting of helplessness burning behind his eyes. He knew, on some level, that Katsuki's cruelty wasn't simple malice. It was a twisted, aggressive form of concern, born from a shared childhood. They had grown up together, two sides of the same coin. Katsuki, the prodigy blessed by a wrathful goddess. Izuku, the quiet observer who worshipped heroes. When Izuku was declared unblessed, Katsuki had taken it as a personal affront. His best friend, his rival, was a defective toy. His bullying was a relentless, violent campaign to force Izuku to accept his powerlessness, to stop chasing foolish dreams that would only get him killed. "If you just accept you're a nobody," his actions screamed, "then I won't have to worry about you." But Izuku couldn't accept it. He couldn't silence the voice in his heart that screamed to help, to intervene, to be like the hero who occupied the very pinnacle of their world, the Pharaoh. Pharaoh Tashinori, the eighth light of Ra. He was more than a man. He was a living god. He was the vessel for the Ka of Ra, the ultimate Heka passed down through generations. When he appeared in public, he was a giant of a man, wreathed in a golden light so brilliant it was hard to look upon. His smile was said to cure ailments, and his strength could hold back the very tide of the Nile. Legend said he had once stopped an earthquake by punching the ground. He was the symbol of strength, of justice, of absolute, unwavering hope. He was everything Izuku dreamed of being. Wiping his eyes with the back of his ink-stained hand, Izuku gathered his remaining scrolls. He wouldn't let Kaken stop him. He would just have to start again. He would work harder. He would be more careful. He had to. It was the only way he knew how to move forward. The main marketplace of Thebes was a living, breathing creature. It roared with the haggling of merchants, the braying of donkeys, the laughter of children, and the constant hum of 1,000 conversations. The air was thick with the scent of roasting fowl, fragrant lotus blossoms, and the pungent aroma of goat herds being driven through the packed dirt avenues. Izuku navigated the chaos with the practiced ease of a lifelong resident, his new, blank papyrus and writing tools tucked securely in his satchel. He was on an errand for his master, to procure a rare pigment from a merchant near the western gate. But as always, his eyes were scanning, his mind cataloging. He saw a woman use a small gust of wind, a minor blessing of Shu, to keep the flies from her fish stall. He watched a builder use a heka of enhanced strength to lift a block of limestone that should have required 4 men. Power was everywhere, woven into the fabric of daily life, as common as the sand underfoot. It was then that the familiar order of the chaos was shattered. A shout went up, followed by a woman's scream. The crowd parted like a school of fish startled by a predator. Thundering down the main thoroughfare was a chariot, not the simple cart of a farmer, but the sleek, war-ready chariot of a royal courier. Its 2 horses, magnificent black stallions with eyes wide with terror, galloped blindly, their reins snapped and whipping in the air. The driver was slumped over in the cab, a bloody gash on his forehead, a victim of some unseen accident. The chariot was an instrument of pure destruction. It smashed through market stalls, sending pottery, fruit, and textiles flying. People scrambled out of the way, flattening themselves against walls and diving into alleyways. Izuku froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw the Medjay guards at the edge of the market blowing their whistles, trying to organize a response, but they were too far away. He saw men with powerful heka, warriors and off-duty soldiers, hesitate. To stop a runaway chariot at full gallop was a monumental risk. A mistake could mean being trampled to death. They weighed the risk against the reward, their instincts for self-preservation winning out. And then Izuku saw him. A little boy, no older than 5, who had dropped a small wooden hippo he was clutching. It had rolled into the middle of the street. Crying, oblivious to the thunderous approach of the hooves, the child toddled out to retrieve his toy. His mother, trapped behind a toppled fruit cart, screamed his name in pure, unadulterated terror. Seti! Seti, come back! Time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw it all with the crystal clarity of his analytical mind. The distance to the child. The speed of the chariot. The panicked inaction of the crowd. He calculated the odds. There was no time. No one was going to act. The boy was going to die. He didn't think. He didn't weigh the risks. He didn't remember that he was unblessed, that he was weak, that he was Deku. His legs just moved. The satchel containing his precious scrolls slipped from his shoulder. He didn't even notice. He sprinted, his sandaled feet pounding against the hard-packed earth. The wind rushed past his ears, filled with the panicked shouts of the crowd and the roar of the approaching chariot. His lungs burned. His legs, unused to such exertion, screamed in protest. Faster! I'm not fast enough. The right-hand horse was almost upon the boy. Its flared nostrils snorted with fear, its massive hooves poised to descend like stone hammers. Izuku wouldn't make it to the boy in time to pull him away. It was a simple, brutal calculation, so he changed the equation. With a desperate cry, he unslung the satchel from his other shoulder, this one filled with the heavy pigment jars for his master, and hurled it with all his might. He didn't aim for the horse's head, which might only enrage it further. He aimed for its feet. The heavy bag struck the ground just in front of the charging stallion. The clay jars within shattered, and the horse, already terrified, shied violently at the unexpected impact and sound. It reared, breaking its stride and pulling its partner with it. The chariot swerved sharply, its wheel catching the edge of a well, splintering with a sound like a breaking bone. That 1-second delay was all Izuku needed. He dove, ignoring the sharp pain as his shoulder and cheek scraped against the ground. He wrapped his arms around the small, crying boy, pulling the child into his chest and rolling with the momentum. They tumbled through the dirt and grime, coming to a stop just as the crippled, out-of-control chariot careened past them, finally crashing into the side of a granary with a final, shuddering crunch. Silence descended for a heartbeat, thick and profound. Then the world rushed back in. The mother's sobbing cries of relief, the awed murmurs of the crowd, the whinnying of the exhausted horses. Izuku lay on the ground, his body trembling, his arms still wrapped protectively around the child, who was wailing in his ear. He had done it. He had actually done it. A wave of dizzying relief washed over him. "Are you all right, boy?" a gruff voice asked. Izuku looked up. One of the Medjay guards, Kenji, the very man he had been studying earlier, stood over him. His face, framed by a leather helmet, was stern, but his eyes held a flicker of something else. "Respect. I think so," Izuku stammered, releasing the child, who immediately scrambled to his mother's waiting arms. Kenji offered Izuku a calloused hand and pulled him to his feet. He looked from the wreckage of the chariot to the small, ink-stained boy in front of him. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," the guard grunted. He clapped Izuku on the shoulder, a gesture so forceful it nearly sent him stumbling again. "You've got the heart of a Medjay, boy, even if you lack the god's favor. Now get out of here before you get into any more trouble." Izuku, dazed and bruised, could only nod. He gathered the tattered remains of his satchel, his master's expensive pigments now just colored dust, and limped away, melting back into the crowd. He didn't see the whispers that followed him, the looks of astonishment on the faces of people who had only ever known him as the quiet, unblessed scribe's boy. He didn't notice their perceptions of him shifting like sand in the wind. And he certainly did not notice the figure standing in the deep shadows of an alleyway across the square. The man was old and impossibly gaunt, his form so skeletal he seemed to be held together by the simple, rough-spun linen robes that concealed him. He leaned heavily on a plain wooden staff, and his face was a road map of deep lines and ancient weariness. Had anyone looked closely, they would have seen that his eyes, sunken deep in their sockets, held a power that defied his frail appearance, a fading, but still potent, golden light. Pharaoh Tashinori, the eighth light of Ra, had seen it all. He had left the stifling confines of the palace, as he often did, to walk among his people, to feel the pulse of the nation he was sworn to protect. He had felt the tremor of panic, had seen the runaway chariot, and had been about to intervene. The golden Ka of Ra had already begun to gather in his limbs, ready to burst forth and assert divine order. But then he saw the green-haired boy. He had watched, transfixed, as the unblessed child did what no one else would. He hadn't used Heka. He hadn't relied on the blessings of the gods. He had used his wits, his courage, and a desperate, selfless will to save a life. He had thrown himself into the path of certain death without a moment's hesitation. Tashinori had seen 1,000 displays of power in his long life. He had witnessed nobles shatter stone with a gesture and priests summon fire from the air. He had commanded armies of the blessed, their Heka a symphony of divine might. But what he had just witnessed was purer. It was heroism distilled to its very essence. It was the spirit of Ma'at, truth, order, and justice, made manifest not through godly power, but through human will. A rattling cough shook his emaciated frame, and he pressed a piece of linen to his lips. When he pulled it away, it was stained with a dark, frightening crimson. His time was running out. The light of the Ka of Ra, the sacred trust he had borne for 40 years, was fading within him like a dying star. He had to find a successor. He had to find the ninth. His viziers and priests urged him to choose from the powerful. Young Shoto, son of the formidable General Enji, who wielded the dual Heka of fire and ice, a blessing of Ra and Happy, or the explosive, prodigiously talented Katsuki Bakugo. They were powerful, noble, strong. They were the obvious choices. But looking at the retreating back of the small, limping scribe, a different idea began to form in Tashinori's mind. The Ka of Ra was not a prize to be won. It was a burden to be shouldered. It required a vessel strong enough to contain its immense power, yes, but more importantly, it required a heart pure enough to wield it without ambition, without ego. A heart dedicated to others. Perhaps the perfect vessel was not one already filled with the pride of Heka, but one that was empty. Ready to be filled not just with power, but with purpose. A faint, weary smile touched Toshinori's lips for the first time that day. The search for the ninth light, he realized, might just be over. The great palace of Thebes was a city within a city, a monument of white limestone and polished granite that seemed to touch the sky. Its halls were vast and cool, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat outside. Sunlight streamed through high, slitted windows, illuminating columns carved in the likeness of papyrus stalks and walls covered in intricate hieroglyphs that sang the praises of the gods and the glory of the pharaohs. In the pharaoh's private audience chamber, the air was heavy with the scent of myrrh and the weight of unspoken fear. Pharaoh Toshinori sat upon the throne of Horus, a massive seat of gilded cedar inlaid with lapis lazuli. But he was not the radiant, towering figure his subjects knew. He had allowed the golden illusion of the Ka'avare to fall away, and in its place was the true man, a gaunt, skeletal figure who seemed swallowed by the grandeur of his office. His ornate robes hung from his sharp shoulders like cloth on a scarecrow. Before him stood his Grand Vizier Soris, a tall, severe man with a mind as sharp as an obsidian blade. He had served Toshinori for decades, and he was one of the few mortals who knew the pharaoh's secret. The reports from the Delta are troubling, my lord, Soris said, his voice low and steady, betraying no emotion. Another village has gone dark. The governor of the province, a man whose Heka could turn water to wine, was found in his villa, withered, like a dried figure. His Heka, the priests say, was stolen from him. Toshinori's expression was grim. Achan, he rasped, the name a curse on his tongue. Soris nodded. The Heka devourer. His cult grows bolder. They preach a new gospel, that the gods were haphazard in their gifts, and that true order can only be achieved when all Heka is gathered into a single, worthy vessel. Into him. Suddenly, Toshinori was seized by a violent, body-racking cough. He doubled over on the throne, his hand flying to his mouth. Soris moved to his side instantly, his professional facade cracking to reveal a deep, personal concern. My lord! The healers can do nothing, Toshinori breathed, pulling his hand away. Fresh blood glistened on his palm. The golden light of the Ka'avare flickered weakly around him, like a candle in a gale. This is a wound no poultice can mend. It is the price of containing this power, and the cost of my last battle with him. Soris looked at his king, his friend, and saw not a god, but a dying man. Then the matter of your succession is more urgent than ever. We must begin the trials. The great houses will present their finest. General Enji is certain his son, Shoto, is the only choice. His control over both fire and ice is unprecedented. Enji sees the Ka'avare as a weapon. A prize for his lineage, Toshinori said, his voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. And the Bakugo boy? He has power in spades, but his heart is choked with pride. He seeks to be the strongest for his own sake, not for the people's. They are the strongest candidates, my lord, Soris insisted gently. The Ka'avare requires a body already accustomed to Heka, a will forged in power. Does it? Toshinori countered, his sunken eyes finding Soris's. Or does it require a spirit of pure sacrifice? A vessel untainted by the desire for greatness? He straightened himself on the throne, a new light in his gaze, one that had not been there that morning. He told Soris what he had seen in the marketplace. He described the runaway chariot, the panicked crowd, and the small, unblessed boy who had run toward danger when all others ran away. He acted without thought for himself, Soris. He did not ask what he would gain. He saw someone in need, and he moved. His body, his very soul, moved on its own to save another. Tell me, old friend, when was the last time you saw a noble with that instinct? Soris was silent for a long moment, his logical mind processing this radical departure from centuries of tradition. The Ka'avare was always given to the most powerful, the most promising of the blessed. To give it to an unblessed, a commoner, it was unthinkable. It was heresy. My lord, you cannot be serious, the vizier finally said, his voice strained. The power would destroy him. His body is not prepared. The court would never accept it. It would plunge the two lands into civil war. The court will accept what their pharaoh decrees, Toshinori stated, his voice ringing with a faint echo of its divine authority. He rose shakily from the throne, leaning on its arm for support. For 8 generations, we have chosen warriors and princes. We have sought strength to fight the shadow of the Heka devourer. But the shadow grows. Perhaps it is because we have been fighting it with the wrong kind of strength. He walked to the chamber's balcony, looking out over the sprawling city of Thebes. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The greatest strength, the strength that truly honors Ra, is not the power to smite your enemies, he said, his voice soft but resonant. It is the will to protect the helpless, the Heka devourer. All for one, he preys on the desire for power. The only one who can truly defeat him is one who has never known that desire. He turned back to his vizier, his decision settling upon him with the weight and finality of a pyramid's capstone. The search is over, Soris. A new path must be forged. The 9th light of Ra will not be found on a throne or in a general's mansion. His tired, golden eyes seemed to look past the palace walls, past the bustling city, to a small scriptorium where a boy was likely tending to his bruises and mourning the loss of a ruined scroll. He will be found in the dust, with a heart that bleeds for others. Send for the boy. The scribe's apprentice. Izuka Midoriya. The moon, a sliver of polished bone in the indigo sky, offered little comfort to the man who was supposed to be its celestial brother. Within the pharaoh's private chambers, far from the public eye, the trappings of divinity were a cruel mockery. Torches sputtered in gilded sconces, casting long, dancing shadows that made the room's opulent murals of gods and heroes seem to writhe in silent judgment. The air, heavy with the scent of cedar and lotus oil, was a stifling shroud. Tashinori, the 8th light of Ra, the living Horus, sat on the edge of his bed. He was not the colossus of a man who held court, the radiant being whose smile could calm a riot. He was a creature of bone and shadow, his bare torso a roadmap of old scars dominated by one horrific, puckered wound on his left side. It was an ancient injury, a crater of ruined flesh that seemed to pull the rest of his body inward, a constant, physical reminder of his greatest failure. The power within him, the Ka of Ra, felt less like a divine light and more like a furnace full of broken glass. For 40 years, it had been a sun in his soul, a wellspring of boundless strength. Now, it was a raging, uncontrolled fire consuming its own vessel. Every breath was a labor. Every beat of his heart sent a fresh wave of agony radiating from the old wound. This was the true price of his last battle with Achan, 5 years prior. He had won, yes. He had shattered the Heka devourer's body and sent him fleeing into the shadows. But Achan, in turn, had dealt him a wound that festered not in the flesh, but in the very Heka he wielded. He had poisoned the well. A cough, low and wet, started deep in his chest. He grabbed a strip of fine linen from a bedside table, pressing it to his lips as the spasm seized him. It was a familiar, wretched agony, a storm inside his hollow frame. When it passed, he was left gasping, his vision swimming with black spots. He slowly lowered the cloth, his hand trembling. It was soaked in crimson, dark and stark in the flickering torchlight. How much longer? He whispered to the empty room. Or perhaps, not so empty. He closed his eyes. In the quiet darkness of his mind, he could feel them. The others. The 7 who had come before him. They were not voices, not ghosts, but presences, flickering embers of consciousness bound to the Ka of Ra Nana, his mistress and predecessor, her spirit a gentle, unwavering warmth. Daigoro, the 5th, a boisterous and cunning soul. And the others, fading back into the mists of history, their wills and their strength now a part of the great river of power he was failing to contain. He could feel their collective concern, a silent pressure against his own weary spirit. He was the dam holding back the darkness, and he was cracking. A soft knock came at the chamber door. Enter, Soris, Tashinori rasped, forcing himself to sit up straighter, pulling a simple linen robe over his ruined torso. The Grand Vizier entered with the silent grace of a hunting cat. Soris's face was, as always, an impassive mask of polished granite, but his dark, intelligent eyes missed nothing. They swept over the pharaoh's trembling hands, the blood-stained cloth he tried to hide, the sheen of sweat on his brow. You should be resting, my lord, Soris said, his voice a low baritone that was a fixture of the court. The sun does not rest, old friend, Tashinori replied, a bitter smile twisting his lips. It only sets. And my sunset is fast approaching. Soris placed a papyrus scroll on a nearby table. Reports from our agents in the lower kingdom. Akon's cult, the children of the void, are no longer hiding in the shadows. They are openly recruiting, promising the unblessed a place of honor in their new world. They call him the Great Equalizer, the one who will take Heka from the undeserving blessed and restore balance. He twists the frustrations of the powerless into a weapon, Tashinori murmured, his knuckles white as he gripped the arm of his chair. He offers them hope, but the price is their souls. He will devour them all to feed his own insatiable hunger. Which is why we must act, Soris pressed, his composure finally showing a crack. The great houses are clamoring for the trials of Ma'at to begin. They see the vacant captaincies in the army, the growing unrest. They believe a new, vigorous heir, announced in training at your side, would quell the fear and project strength. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. General Enji becomes more insistent by the day. He claims his son Shoto's mastery of fire and ice is a sign from the gods themselves. A perfect balance, destined to rule. Taishinori let out a humorless laugh, which quickly devolved into another hacking cough. Enji sees only power. He sees the throne as the ultimate conquest for his bloodline. He has forged his son into a magnificent weapon, but a weapon does not know how to heal a nation. It only knows how to strike. Then the Bakugo heir, Soris countered, ever the pragmatist. His explosive Heka is raw, untamed, but its potential is perhaps the greatest we have seen in a generation. He has the spirit of a conqueror. Exactly, Tashinori said, his gaze turning distant. A conqueror. Not a protector. The Kaavare would amplify that pride, that aggression, until it consumed him. He would become a tyrant in the name of strength, no better than the evil he would be meant to fight. He stood and walked stiffly to a section of the chamber wall that was not painted, but carved. It was a sprawling, secret history, a story told in deeply etched hieroglyphs that only he and his vizier could truly comprehend. Look here, Soris, Tashinori said, tracing a finger over the ancient stone. The beginning. Long before the first dynasty, when the gods still walked among mortals, the carving depicted two powerful figures. One stood beneath the sun disk of Are, his hands outstretched as if giving a blessing. From his body, lines of energy flowed outward, touching sketches of people building cities, raising crops, and living in peace. The other figure stood under a starless sky, his hands curled into claws, pulling lines of energy from others, leaving them as withered husks at his feet. The first, Tashinori explained, his voice taking on the cadence of a priest reciting a sacred text. The story the priests tell is a simplification. They say Horus was given the power to rule by his father, Are. The truth is more complex. Are had two sons who walked the earth. The first, whom we shall call Yoichi, was frail of body but pure of heart. He believed Heka was a gift to be shared, a tool to build, to unite, to protect. His brother was a shadow. A man born with a terrible, unique Heka, the power to take the Heka of others for himself. He saw power not as a gift, but as a resource to be hoarded. He believed that only he was worthy of wielding it all. Soris nodded slowly. The first Heka devourer, indeed. He amassed power, stealing the gifts of countless souls, becoming a god of his own making. He tried to force his brother to join him, but Yoichi refused. So, the devourer, in a fit of cruel irony, forced the Heka upon his powerless brother, a simple Heka, one that could stockpile energy. He meant it as a prison, a brand, but he did not understand his brother's spirit. Tashinori moved his hand to the next panel, which showed the frail Yoichi passing a spark of light to another figure before dying. That figure then added their own light to the spark and passed it on to a third. The Heka his brother gave him merged with Yoichi's own unique, indomitable spirit. His will to save, to protect. It became something new. A power that could be passed from one person to another, growing with the life force and Heka of each new wielder. A sacred torch to be carried through the darkness. The Kaavare. He tapped the chest of the first figure. One for all. Then he tapped the chest of the shadowy brother. And all for one. Two sides of a coin, locked in a war since the dawn of man. One Heka created to give, the other born to take. He turned away from the wall, his skeletal frame silhouetted against the torchlight. For 8 generations, this power has been entrusted to the strong, and for 8 generations, the shadow of all for one has endured. Achan is not the first, and he will not be the last. We have been fighting fire with fire, Soris. It is time we tried fighting the desert with a river. He looked at his vizier, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. Yesterday, I told you I found a candidate. An unblessed boy. Soris's face tightened. My lord, I implore you to reconsider. It is a noble sentiment, but a fatal one. The Ka'avare is a raging sea of power. To pour it into a vessel that has never held so much as a drop of Heka, the boy's body would be torn apart. You would be sentencing him to death. A risk, I admit, Tashinori conceded. But one we must take. An empty vessel can be shaped. A vessel already full of pride and ambition will only overflow. This power, this Ka, has a will of its own. It responds to the heart. And the heart I saw yesterday, it was the heart of a true hero. The purest I have ever seen. He would not be swayed. Soris could see it in the set of his jaw, in the fire that had returned to his eyes. For the first time in months, the Pharaoh was not just a man waiting to die. He was a king with a purpose. I will not argue further, my lord, Soris said, bowing his head in deference. But the nobles will not understand. They will see this as a sign of weakness, of madness. You must give them something to appease them. A test. Tashinori nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. Yes. A test. A trial of might to find a soul worthy of serving the Pharaoh directly. Let the nobles preen in posture. Let them show off their son's Heka. But the final test will not be one of strength, but of spirit. His gaze was fixed on a point beyond the chamber walls. And now, old friend, help me with my robes. I have a walk to take. The following afternoon, the sun was once again at its zenith. Izuku Midoriya was in the marketplace, though he kept to the periphery, his shoulders hunched. The previous day's events had turned him into a minor curiosity. People pointed and whispered as he passed. Some offered words of praise, calling him brave. Others scoffed, calling him a fool who got lucky. Both felt equally uncomfortable. He had received a stern but ultimately forgiving lecture from his master, Benipe, about the destroyed pigments, followed by a surprising and gentle tending to his scrapes and bruises. Now, he was tasked with a simpler errand, fetching water from the public cistern near the Temple of Thoth. He felt a deep, gnawing anxiety. His heroic moment had felt less like a conscious choice and more like a bizarre out-of-body experience. He had acted, yes, but now, in the calm light of day, the sheer, idiotic risk of it all crashed down on him. He could have been killed. He should have been killed. Katsuki's words echoed in his head. How can you save anyone when you're less than no one? He had saved the boy, but it felt like a fluke, a statistical anomaly. He was still unblessed. He was still Deku. He reached the cistern, a large stone basin where cool, clean water was channeled from an underground spring. It was a quieter spot, shaded by a pair of tall date palms. He set down his clay jars and began to fill them, his mind a whirlwind of self-recrimination and doubt, a heavy burden for one so young. The voice was old and raspy, like stones grinding together. Izuku jumped, splashing water on his sandals. He turned to see an old man he hadn't noticed before, sitting on a low stone wall in the shade. The man was incredibly frail, wrapped in simple, dusty robes, and leaning on a plain wooden staff. His face was a web of wrinkles, and he looked as though a strong gust of wind might carry him away. Oh! I am sorry, sir. I didn't see you, Izuku stammered, bowing his head respectfully. No apology necessary, my boy, the old man said, his voice kind. I was speaking of the thoughts in your head. They seem a heavier weight than those water jars. Izuku stared at him, startled. How did you know? The old man offered a gentle, weary smile. I have lived a long time. Long enough to recognize the look of a young man wrestling with his own shadow. I was here yesterday. I saw what you did. Izuku's face burned with a fresh wave of embarrassment. He ducked his head, focusing on tying the stoppers on his jars. It was nothing. I was just foolish. Foolish? The old man echoed, his voice laced with curiosity. He shifted on the wall, leaning forward slightly on his staff. The Medjay called you brave. A mother called you a savior, yet you call yourself a fool. Why is that? The question was so direct, so earnest, that it disarmed Izuku completely. He found himself answering with a raw honesty he rarely afforded anyone. Because I didn't have a plan, he mumbled, his voice thick with frustration. I just ran. I had no Heka to stop the horses, no great strength to protect the boy. My only weapon was a bag of pigment jars. It shouldn't have worked. 1,000 things could have gone wrong. The horses could have trampled me anyway. The chariot could have swerved and hit a dozen other people. I acted without thinking, and that's not heroic, it's just reckless. It wasn't the act of a hero, it was a spasm. The old man listened patiently, his gaze never leaving Izuku's face. When Izuku finished, a deep silence settled between them, broken only by the distant murmur of the market. Tell me, the old man said at last, his voice soft but penetrating. When you saw that child in the path of the chariot, when you saw the fear in his mother's eyes, and you saw the blessed warriors hesitating, what did you feel? Izuku looked up from his jars, his own memories flooding back. The thunder of the hooves. The collective gasp of the crowd. The small, lonely figure of the boy. I felt. He started, his voice barely a whisper. I felt terror. Not for myself. I didn't even think about myself. I felt the mother's terror. I saw the boy, and it was like he was silently screaming for help. Like his face was saying, someone, please save me. And no one was moving. All that power in the crowd, all that Heka, and everyone was frozen. It wasn't right. His hands, forgotten at his sides, clenched into tight fists. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes, born not of sadness, but of a profound, burning indignation. I don't know why I ran, he confessed, the words tumbling out of him now, a torrent of pent-up emotion. My legs, they just started moving. It was like my body knew what to do before my brain did. He looked like he was asking for help, and my body just responded. He finished, panting slightly, his face wet with tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. He felt exposed, foolish for having unloaded his deepest, most confusing feelings onto a complete stranger. He expected the old man to laugh, or to offer some placating platitude. Instead, the old man's face was transformed. The weariness seemed to have vanished from his features, replaced by an expression of profound, soul-shaking relief. A light shone in his deep-set eyes, a glimmer of gold that seemed far too bright for such a frail form. My body just responded, the old man repeated, his voice filled with a strange, powerful emotion. My boy, those are the words of a true hero. More so than any boast of strength or display of power. He struggled to his feet, using the staff for support. He was taller than Izuku had realized, his stooped frame unfolding to a surprising height. He took a step closer, and for the first time, Izuku felt an aura around him, not of Heka, but of immense, ancient authority. It was like standing at the base of a great pyramid. The old man reached out a thin, trembling hand and placed it on Izuku's shoulder. His touch was light, but it sent a jolt through Izuku's entire body, a feeling like the first rays of dawn warming a cold stone. For many years, the old man said, his voice now imbued with a resonance that seemed to echo in Izuku's very bones, I have searched. I have looked for strength, for power, for a will of iron, but all this time, I was looking for the wrong thing. He looked deep into Izuku's wide, startled emerald eyes. The golden light in his own gaze intensified, swirling like molten metal. Greatness is not a birthright. It is not a gift from the gods you are given. It is a choice you make, a fire you nurture within a worthy heart. You, who have been told you are nothing, possess the one thing that truly matters. The world around them seemed to fade away. The sounds of the market, the heat of the sun, the weight of the water jars, it all vanished. There was only the old man's burning gaze and his earth-shaking words. You unblessed boy. The voice was no longer that of a frail elder. It was a voice of command, of history, of divine decree. It was the voice of the Nile, of the desert, of the sky itself. You can become the pillar that holds up the sky. The proclamation came like a thunderclap on a cloudless day. Royal heralds, their voices amplified by minor Heka that made their words carry over the din of the city, stood at the corners of every major square. Their bronze horns, shaped like coiled serpents, blared a call that silenced the marketplace haggling and halted the endless processions of laborers. On papyrus scrolls sealed with the pharaoh's own cartouche, the decree was posted for all who could read, and read aloud for the countless who could not. Pharaoh Tashinori, the eighth light of Ra, the living Horus, announced the commencement of the trial of Ma'at. The news spread through Thebes faster than a flash flood down a desert wadi. The purpose, as stated on the scrolls, was to find an individual of supreme worthiness, in spirit, strength, and Heka, to serve as the pharaoh's personal champion, the Shemsinisu, the follower of the king. It was a position of immense honor, one that had not been filled for over a century. It was, in essence, a public search for an heir apparent. For Izuku Midoriya, the world tilted on its axis. The old man at the cistern, his impossible words. "You can become the pillar that holds up the sky." Izuku had dismissed it as the heat-addled rambling of a kind but delusional elder. He had spent the night in a fever of confusion, his mind replaying the strange encounter, the intensity in the man's golden eyes. Now this. It couldn't be a coincidence, but the alternative, that the frail old man was somehow connected to the pharaoh himself, was too fantastic to contemplate. His master, Benipe, was swept up in the city's fervor. The scriptorium was granted a prestigious commission to officially record the proceedings of the trial. Benipe, his old hands shaking with a mixture of excitement and reverence, chose Izuku as his assistant. "You have the keenest eye, my boy," he'd said, oblivious to the turmoil raging behind Izuku's wide green eyes. "You will miss nothing. This will be a record for the ages." And so, 3 days later, Izuku found himself standing at the edge of the field of judgment, a massive training ground on the eastern flank of the Karnak temple complex. He felt like a single grain of sand on a vast, windswept dune. A temporary pavilion of fine white linen had been erected to shield the pharaoh's throne from the unforgiving sun. On a raised dais sat Tashinori, not as the gaunt figure Izuku had met, but as the god-king his people knew. He was immense, a towering figure of sculpted muscle and radiant golden light, his famous twin-tufted hair seeming to defy gravity. His presence was so powerful it was a physical force, a wave of warmth and authority that washed over the assembled thousands. Izuku felt a tremor of recognition, a phantom memory of the old man's kind eyes within that divine, smiling visage. It made his head spin. The crowd was a sea of humanity, segregated by the invisible lines of class. Nobles and high-ranking officials sat in shaded stands, fanning themselves with ostrich plumes, their fine jewelry glittering. The common folk, Izuku among them, pressed against rope barriers, their faces upturned with a mixture of awe and hope. The contestants were a gallery of the greatest young talents in the two lands. There were sons of generals and viziers, prodigies from the priestly colleges, and champions from the distant provinces of the Delta. They stood on the sun-baked field, their bodies gleaming with scented oils, their chests puffed with pride. Each one was a vessel of potent Heka, a living testament to the favor of the gods. And among them, two stood out like newborn stars. Katsuki Bakugo made his entrance with all the subtlety of a desert storm. He wore only a simple linen kilt, his muscular form on full display. His explosive Heka crackled audibly around his palms, small sparks of orange light popping in the air. He surveyed his competitors with a look of utter contempt, his crimson eyes promising violence. He wasn't here to compete. He was here to claim what he believed was his by right. The other was Shoto, the son of the formidable General Enji. His arrival was the opposite of Katsuki's. He walked with a silent, chilling grace, his presence sucking the warmth from the air around him. He was strikingly handsome, his face a mask of cold indifference, marred only by a stark, red-burned scar over his left eye. His hair was perfectly divided, half a stark, snowy white, half a deep, burning crimson. This was the outward sign of his unique, legendary Heka, the twin blessings of Ra and Happy, fire and water, or in his case ice. From his right side, a faint mist of condensation rose. From his left, the air shimmered with latent heat. He paid no mind to the other contestants, his gaze fixed solely on the dais where his father, General Enji, watched him with an intensity that was more akin to a forge master inspecting a blade than a father watching his son. Izuku, clutching his scribe's board, felt a familiar, sinking feeling of worthlessness. He began to sketch, to analyze, it was his only defense. His reed pen flew, documenting the stances, the flickers of Heka, the palpable auras of power. It was a desperate attempt to impose order on a world in which he had no place. Find a good spot to cower, scribe? A gentle, friendly voice broke his concentration. He turned to see a young woman with a warm, round face and large, expressive brown eyes. She wore the simple white robes of a priestess in training of the Temple of Isis. A small satchel of herbs and blessed water was slung over her shoulder. "Oh! I'm sorry, I was just—" Izuku stammered, his face flushing. Observing, she finished for him with a smile. "I've seen you in the temple libraries. You're the one who fills scrolls with notes about everyone's Heka, right?" Izuku's blush deepened. "Is it that obvious?" "A little," she giggled. "I'm Achiko. I'm here to assist the healers. They expect injuries." Her gaze drifted to the contestants, a flicker of worry in her eyes. "So much power. I hope they don't hurt each other too badly." "Your Heka is for healing?" Izuku asked, his analytical curiosity overriding his shyness. "Oh no," she said, holding up her hands. She touched a nearby loose stone, about the size of a loaf of bread. A faint pink light enveloped her fingertips. The stone didn't move, but the faint impression it made in the sand vanished. "It's a blessing of Shu, the god of the air. I can remove the weight of things I touch. Their essence, their connection to the earth, is nullified for a time." Izuku's eyes widened. "Weight nullification. The applications are incredible. In construction, you could lift obelisks with ease. In transport, a single man could move a supply cart meant for 10. For rescue, you could lift rubble off trapped people. That's an amazing Heka," he blurted out, his enthusiasm genuine. Achiko looked surprised, then pleased. "Most people think it's not very useful. It's not flashy like that." She gestured toward the field, where the first trial was about to begin, the trial of strength. A simple, brutal test. A single, massive block of Aswan granite, weighing several tons, was placed in the center of the field. The goal: move it, break it, or destroy it. Contestant after contestant tried and failed. A man with the Heka of an ox strained until the veins in his neck bulged, but the stone did not budge. Another, who could manipulate earth, managed to create a fissure beneath it, but could not shift its bulk. Then it was Shoto's turn. He approached the stone with a calm, predatory stride. He placed his right hand on it. A web of brilliant white frost instantly spread across the granite, plunging its temperature far below freezing. The stone groaned under the thermal stress. Then, he placed his left hand beside the first. A burst of intense, fiery heat flooded the frozen rock. The sudden, extreme temperature change was too much. With a deafening crack that echoed across the field, the massive granite block exploded into 1,000 sharp-edged fragments. It was a display of perfect, devastating control. The crowd roared its approval. General Enji allowed himself a small, predatory smile. Katsuki Bakugo was next. He scoffed at the pile of rubble that remained. "Show off," he muttered. He strode to the center of the field, and simply held out his palms toward the largest remaining piece. "AP shot, cataclysm!" he roared. A concentrated, pinpoint blast of pure concussive force erupted from his hands. It wasn't a wide, flashy explosion, but a focused beam of destructive energy. It struck the granite shard and didn't just break it, it vaporized it. The rock turned to dust and superheated gas. The shockwave that followed kicked up a cloud of sand and knocked two nearby contestants off their feet. The crowd, which had been cheering for Shoto, was now stunned into a momentary silence, which was then broken by an even more thunderous ovation. Katsuki stood with his hands smoking, a Pharaoh grin plastered across his face. He had seen Shoto's elegant solution and had answered it with overwhelming, undeniable annihilation. From his throne, Toshinori watched, his divine smile unwavering. But within the golden illusion, his heart was heavy. Power. Control. Destruction. They are magnificent. But they are not what I am looking for. His gaze drifted to the edge of the field, to the small, scribbling boy who seemed more fascinated by the priestess's simple Heka than by the grand displays of the nobles. Patience, he told himself. The true test is yet to come. The trials continued for hours. There was a trial of combat, where the contestants sparred against the Pharaoh's elite Medjay guards. Shoto fought with a deadly grace, creating walls of ice to defend and lances of fire to attack. Katsuki was a berserker, a whirlwind of explosions, propelling himself through the air in unpredictable arcs, his power too wild and overwhelming for the guards to handle. The two of them were in a league of their own, the clear frontrunners. Finally, as the sun began to dip towards the western hills, the Grand Vizier Soris stepped forward to announce the final test. The final trial is the test of divine favor. His amplified voice boomed. Within the pylon of Amenhotep II, he gestured to an old, partially ruined temple gateway that stood at the edge of the training grounds. A sacred relic, a golden ankh, has been placed. The first contestant to retrieve it and present it to the pharaoh will be declared the victor. A murmur of excitement went through the crowd. This was a race. A test of speed and cleverness as well as power. To ensure might is upheld, Soris continued, the trial must be sanctified. Priestess in training Achiko will enter the pylon to perform the final rites of purification. Achiko gave Izuku a nervous smile, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the ancient stone structure. Izuku watched her go, a strange sense of unease coiling in his stomach. The pylon looked ancient, unstable. Why hold the final test there? As the contestants lined up, Tashinori gave Soris a nearly imperceptible nod. The vizier, in turn, subtly touched the amulet around his neck. It was the signal. Achiko had just finished her blessing when the first tremor hit. A low, grinding groan echoed from the very foundations of the pylon. Dust and small pebbles rained down from the high archway. The contestants, poised to sprint, stopped dead in their tracks. The crowd gasped. Then, with a sound like the world cracking in two, the ancient structure began to collapse. It was not a sudden explosion, but a horrifyingly slow, deliberate implosion. Massive blocks of stone, each weighing more than a war chariot, shifted and fell. The main lintel, a single piece of granite the size of a river barge, cracked down the middle. Panic erupted. The contestants scrambled backward, their arrogance forgotten in the face of primal fear. But Achiko was still inside. She had been thrown to the ground by the first tremor and was now trapped, her leg pinned beneath a fallen block of sandstone. She looked up in terror as the massive, cracked lintel stone began to tilt precariously above her, threatening to crush her into nothingness. "Help!" she screamed, her voice thin and desperate. The crowd was in chaos. The Medjay guards were trying to establish a perimeter, shouting orders that were lost in the noise. Katsuki and Shoto, the two paragons of power, stood at the edge of the collapsing ruin. "Stay back! It's too unstable!" Shoto yelled, creating a small barrier of ice to stop anyone from rushing in foolishly. He analyzed the situation with cold precision. The lintel was too heavy to stop, and the surrounding structure was too fragile. A blast of fire or a pillar of ice would likely just accelerate the collapse. Katsuki growled in frustration, his hands popping with useless explosions. "Damn it! There's no angle. Anything I do will bring the whole thing down on her head." He was a weapon of mass destruction, but this situation called for a scalpel, not a battering ram. Their immense power had rendered them helpless. From his throne, Tashinori leaned forward, the golden light around him seeming to dim for a fraction of a second. This was the moment. "Show me, boy," he thought, his gaze locked on the small figure at the edge of the crowd. Show them all. Izuku wasn't looking at the problem through the lens of Heka. He wasn't thinking about what power could solve the problem. His mind, the mind of an analyst, a scribe, was processing data at a furious rate. Angle of the lintel's descent. Stress fractures in the support pillars. Position of the trapped priestess. Composition of the stone blocks. He had spent years studying architecture for his analytical scrolls, learning how the great temples were built. Which meant he also knew how they fell, and he saw it. An answer. Not a perfect one, but a chance. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. Just like with the chariot, his body simply moved. "DKU, you idiot! Get back here!" Katsuki roared, but Izuku was already gone, a green-clad blur sprinting toward the collapsing pylon. He dodged a falling piece of cornice, his heart hammering in his ears. The groaning of the dying temple was deafening. "Achiko!" he yelled, his voice hoarse. She saw him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Get out of here! You'll be killed! Listen to me!" Izuku shouted over the din, skidding to a halt near a massive, still intact support pillar. "You're Heka! Can you make something big weightless?" I can try. But not for long," she cried, her voice strained with pain and effort. The block pinning her leg was immense. Izuku pointed to a long, heavy-duty wooden support beam that had been knocked free from the scaffolding used for the temple's upkeep. "That beam! When I get it in place, use your power on it." Just for a second, he grabbed the thick, splintery wood. It was impossibly heavy, but adrenaline surged through him. He strained, his muscles screaming, and managed to drag it toward the pillar. He was trying to create a lever, a fulcrum. If he could wedge the beam between the pillar and the tilting lintel, he might, just might, be able to redirect the path of its fall, shifting its trajectory by a few precious feet, creating a space for her to survive. It was insane. It was desperate. It was the only plan he had. "Now!" he screamed, heaving the end of the beam upwards. Achiko, understanding his intent, reached out a trembling hand. The pink glow enveloped the massive wooden beam. For a single, miraculous second, it became as light as a feather. Izuku shoved it into place, wedging it against the pillar, and angling it just below a protrusion on the falling lintel stone. Then her power gave out. The beam's immense weight returned, and it locked into place with a groan of stressed wood. At that exact moment, the lintel gave way completely. It fell, a slab of granite that would have flattened a building. But instead of falling straight down, it struck the angled beam. With a sound like the sky splitting open, the wooden beam shattered into a million splinters. But it had done its job. The trajectory of the falling lintel was altered. It shifted sideways, crashing down exactly where Achiko had been just a moment before, but its altered path had created a small, triangular pocket of space around the pillar. The entire structure collapsed in on itself, throwing up a cloud of dust so thick it blotted out the sun. Silence. A horrified, breathless silence fell over the field of judgment. Everyone stared at the mountain of rubble, certain they had just witnessed the death of two people. Katsuki stood frozen, his face pale, the name Deku a silent word on his lips. Shoto's carefully constructed composure was shattered, his eyes wide with disbelief. From the throne, Toshinori was on his feet, the golden aura around him blazing. He knew the plan had worked. But he also knew it wasn't over. A faint cough came from the dust cloud. Then another. As the dust began to settle, a shape became visible. Izuku was on his hands and knees, shielding Achiko with his own body. They were alive, saved by the pocket of space his desperate gambit had created. But they were not safe. A final, massive block from the very top of the pylon, dislodged in the final collapse, was now tumbling down directly towards their small haven. It was a perfectly square block of limestone, and there was nothing to stop it, nothing to divert it. This was an unforeseen variable. This was real. Achiko screamed. Izuku looked up, and his blood ran cold. He had no more plans. No more tricks. He could only do one thing. He closed his eyes and huddled over her, a pathetic, powerless shield against the inevitable. And then a shadow fell over them. But it was not the shadow of the stone. It was the shadow of a giant. A golden light blasted away the remaining dust. There, standing over them, one hand raised to the sky, was the Pharaoh. Toshinori. He had crossed the entire field in less than a second, a golden comet of a man. The massive limestone block, a weight that would have crushed a war elephant, was held effortlessly in his single, upraised palm. He wasn't even straining. He looked down at the two trembling figures at his feet. His divine face, usually fixed in a benevolent smile, was stern, powerful, and filled with an emotion no one could decipher. Then he looked out, his gaze sweeping over the stunned contestants, the terrified crowd, the shocked nobles, and his own dumbfounded guards. His voice, without the aid of Heka, boomed across the silent field, a sound of absolute authority. "You have witnessed great displays of power today," he declared, his voice ringing with the clarity of a perfectly forged bell. "You have seen stone shattered and fire command. You have seen Heka that could level cities and freeze the very Nile." He gestured with his free hand, not to Katsuki or Shoto, but to the small, dust-covered boy who was still trying to process what had just happened. But which of these great warriors ran toward the collapse? Which of them put their own life, their own body, between a falling stone and a helpless soul? Power is a gift from the gods, but worthiness is born in the heart. He lowered the massive block to the ground as gently as if it were a baby bird. He then offered a hand to Izuku. Trembling, Izuku took it. The pharaoh's grip was warm and impossibly strong, and it pulled him to his feet. Toshinori kept his hand on Izuku's shoulder, turning him to face the thousands of onlookers. The goal of the trial of Might was to find a soul worthy of serving the pharaoh, a soul of courage, of sacrifice, of unshakable justice. Today, I have found him. He looked at Izuku, and for a fleeting second, Izuku saw the old man from the cistern in the God King's eyes, the same weary kindness, the same flicker of hope. His name is Izuku Midoriya, and he, though unblessed by the gods, has shown more heroism today than any man on this field. Later that night, in a secluded chamber high in the palace, the illusion was gone. The radiant giant was replaced by the gaunt, skeletal man. The weight of his divine performance had cost him dearly. He leaned heavily against a column, his breathing shallow. Izuku stood before him, cleaned of the dust and grime, but still trembling from the day's events. "You lied," Izuku whispered, the words coming out before he could stop them. "The collapse, you planned it." Toshinori did not deny it. The initial collapse, yes. It was a test. The final stone that almost killed you, however, was a miscalculation. For that I apologize. He offered a weak, self-deprecating smile. Even gods can be clumsy. He straightened up, his expression turning serious. I did what I had to do, young Midoriya. I needed to show them. To show the world that the strength I seek for my successor is not the strength of the fist, but of the spirit. He walked toward Izuku, his steps slow and deliberate. Everything I told you at the cistern was the truth. My time as the vessel for the Ka of Ra is ending. The power must be passed on. The ancient evil I am sworn to fight, the Heka devourer known as Aiken, or All for One, grows stronger in the shadows. A new champion must rise. He stopped directly in front of Izuku, his sunken golden eyes boring into the boy's soul. My power, the Ka of Ra, or as it was first known, One for All, is a sacred torch passed from master to student. It is the culmination of the strength of 8 generations, a Heka created for one purpose, to save others. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, the same hand that had caught a falling mountain. I am offering you this power, Izuku Midoriya. I am offering you my Heka. It will be a life of pain, of sacrifice, and of immense burden. If you accept, the world will place all of its hopes and fears upon your shoulders. You will face a darkness that has consumed gods and kings. He looked at the boy, who had been called worthless his entire life, who had dreamed of being a hero in a world that told him he couldn't, and he asked the most important question of all. Will you accept this burden? Will you become the 9th light of Ra and the next pillar of this world? Izuku looked at the dying god before him, at the sincerity and desperate hope in his eyes. He thought of the child in the marketplace, of Ochako trapped beneath the rubble, of a world where the strong stood by while the helpless suffered. He had always been powerless. Now, he was being offered the power to change everything. His answer was never in doubt. With tears streaming down his face, a fire of determination in his heart, he looked up at the 8th light of Ra and gave his reply. I accept. The journey from Thebes was a passage through silence and shadow. They traveled not with the grand procession of a pharaoh, but as whispers in the night. A single, unadorned royal barge, its painted eye of horror seeming to watch the stardusted water, slipped down the Nile under the cloak of a moonless sky. Izuku, wrapped in a simple linen cloak, sat near the bow, the cool river air a stark contrast to the fire of anxiety in his gut. Toshinori, in his gaunt form and similarly disguised, sat opposite him, his silence a heavy, contemplative thing. They were flanked by only 2 of the Medjay's most elite and trusted guards, their faces as impassive as the stone statues that lined the river banks. Their destination was the Giza necropolis, the ancient resting place of the Pyramid Kings, a place of immense power and history. But they were not heading for the Great Pyramid. Their goal was the silent, eternal sentinel that guarded it. The Sphinx. When they finally arrived, the great beast was a mountain of shadow against the star-pricked curtain of the pre-dawn sky. Its familiar, broken face held an aura of profound, ancient mystery. Here, at the nexus of human ambition and divine eternity, Izuku's inheritance awaited. One of the guards, moving with a practiced reverence, approached the Sphinx's left paw. He pressed a sequence of seemingly random points on the weathered stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low, grinding groan that seemed to emanate from the very bedrock of the plateau, a section of the ground between the paws descended, revealing a narrow, dark staircase leading down into the earth. The air that wafted up was cold and dry, smelling of millennia of undisturbed dust and something else, something electric, like the air before a lightning strike. Only the wielders of the Ka and their most trusted may enter here, Tashinori rasped, his voice a low echo in the vast silence. He took a torch from a guard. This is where the first oath was sworn. This is where it will be renewed. Come, my boy. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs as he followed Tashinori down the steep, narrow steps. The walls were smooth and cool to the touch, devoid of any carving or decoration. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the single, sputtering flame of their torch. After a descent that felt like it went to the very core of the world, they emerged into a circular chamber. Izuku gasped. It was not a tomb or a treasure room. It was a map of the heavens. The ceiling was a high dome of polished obsidian, inlaid with flecks of lapis lazuli, quartz, and gold to form a perfect, breathtaking replica of the night sky. The constellations of the gods, Osiris, Isis, Set, and the others, wheeled above them in silent splendor. The floor was a mirror of the ceiling, a map of the two lands carved from a single piece of polished diorite, the Nile a winding vein of inlaid turquoise. The walls were covered in a continuous, spiraling band of hieroglyphs, depicting 8 distinct figures. Izuku, the scribe, recognized the style. It wasn't one artist. It was 8 different hands, 8 different eras of history, each one telling the story of a hero. He saw a figure who looked like a wise architect, another who was a fierce, lion-headed warrior woman, and closer to the present, a smiling woman with flowing hair who passed the glowing symbol to a younger, healthier version of the man standing beside him. In the precise center of the room, directly beneath a golden inlay of the sun disk on the ceiling, was a simple, unadorned stone altar. Upon it rested a single golden chalice. This is the Chamber of the Covenant, Tashinori said, his voice resonating with the weight of the ages. Each wielder of the Ka has come here to receive the power, and each has carved their story upon these walls before their time was done. He gestured to a blank section of the spiral. That space, that will one day be for you. The finality of it, the sheer, crushing weight of the legacy, threatened to buckle Izuku's knees. He was just a scribe's apprentice. A boy who had been called useless his entire life. How could his story ever belong beside these titans? Tashinori seemed to read his thoughts. He placed a bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. They were all afraid, young Midoriya. Every single one of them. Fear is not the enemy. Letting it paralyze you is. The power chose them for their hearts, just as it has now chosen you. He walked to the altar. The process of transference is absolute. Once the Ka has chosen a new vessel, it will begin to fade from the old. Once I pass it to you, my time as a hero, as the light of Ra is over. My embers may burn for a while longer, but the great fire will be yours to command. He turned, his sunken eyes locking onto Izuku's. This is your final chance. If you have any doubt, any hesitation, you must speak now. There is no shame in admitting the burden is too great. Izuku looked at the dying Pharaoh, this great man who was willing to extinguish his own light so that the world would not fall into darkness. He thought of the village governor found withered like a dried fig, a victim of Aken's monstrous power. He thought of the promise of a world where one's worth was not determined by the lottery of their birth. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but beneath it, a stronger feeling was taking root, determination. I have no doubts, Izuku said, his voice clearer and stronger than he expected. I accept. A proud, weary smile touched Tashinori's lips. Very well. He took a small, ceremonial knife from the altar. Without flinching, he made a tiny cut on his thumb. A single drop of blood, surprisingly vibrant and glowing with a faint golden light, welled up. He held it over the chalice and let it fall. The moment the drop hit the bottom of the cup, it did not splatter. It shone, expanding into a sphere of liquid light the size of a pigeon's egg. The blood holds the essence. The ka. It must be ingested willingly, Toshinori explained. He held the chalice out to Izuku. To become the vessel, you must take the fire inside. Izuku's hand trembled as he took the cup. He looked down at the shimmering, golden bead of power. It pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic beat, like a tiny, captured heart. This was it. The culmination of 8 lifetimes of struggle and sacrifice. The power to save. The power to become a hero. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and drank. The liquid light had no taste, no texture. For a single, terrifying second, there was nothing. Izuku opened his eyes, a flicker of confusion on his face. Had it failed? And then the sun erupted in his soul. It was a sensation beyond pain, beyond comprehension. It was the Big Bang happening inside his own body. A torrent of raw, untamed energy flooded every nerve, every vein, every cell. It felt like his blood was boiling and freezing at the same time. A blinding white light exploded behind his eyes, and a sound like 1,000 roaring lions filled his ears. He felt them. The 8 souls. They weren't just carvings on a wall anymore. They were a presence, a cacophony of voices and memories crashing into his own consciousness. He felt the serene wisdom of the architect, the fierce joy of battle from the warrior woman, the gentle but unbreakable will of Nana Shimura, Toshinori's master. It was too much. His mind, his very identity, felt like it was being drowned in a sea of history. He screamed, a raw, ragged sound, and collapsed to his knees. His body convulsed, every muscle locking and spasming. Green sparks, the color of his own spirit, erupted from his skin, dancing over his arms and chest like rogue lightning. He was a dam breaking under the force of a cosmic ocean. The power wasn't just in him, it was him, rewriting him from the inside out. Toshinori, now looking even more skeletal, his skin pale and stretched taut over his bones, watched with a pained but steady gaze. He did not intervene. This was a battle Izuku had to win on his own. He had to tame the storm, or be torn apart by it. Izuku's mind latched onto a single thought, a lifeline in the hurricane. I have to save people. It was the simple, core principle that had defined his entire life. He clung to it, repeating it like a mantra. I have to save people. I have to be a hero. I accepted. I accepted. Slowly, agonizingly, the storm began to subside. The roaring in his ears faded to a constant, powerful hum. The blinding light receded, leaving behind a warm, steady glow that seemed to emanate from his very heart. The chorus of voices quieted, not vanishing, but settling into a deep, resonant chord in the back of his mind. He opened his eyes. He was drenched in sweat, trembling uncontrollably, but he was whole. He could feel it. The Kaavare. It was thrumming beneath his skin, a wild, untamed god now living in the temple of his body. You did it, my boy, Toshinori breathed, a wave of relief making him sag against the altar. You withstood the torrent. The power is yours. Izuku staggered to his feet, his legs feeling like jelly. He looked at his hands. They looked the same, but they felt completely different. He could feel a universe of energy coiled within them, begging for release. I can feel it, he stammered. It's so much. It is, Toshinori said. Now you must learn to grasp it. Even a fraction of it. Look at that wall. He pointed to a section of blank stone, far from the precious hieroglyphs. The power responds to your will, to your emotion. Let it surge into your arm. Focus on the feeling of wanting to protect, of wanting to strike down evil. Then, clench your buttocks, and scream this from the bottom of your heart, smash. It was the most absurd instruction Izuku had ever heard. But it came from the man who had held up a mountain of stone, so he listened. He took a deep breath, picturing Aiken, picturing the runaway chariot, picturing every injustice he had ever witnessed. He felt the power answer his call, a raging flood of energy surging from his heart, down his shoulder, and into his right arm. It was too much, a wild, uncontrolled deluge. His arm began to glow with a brilliant, blinding emerald light. He pulled his fist back. Smash! He screamed, the word tearing from his throat. He punched the stone wall. The impact was apocalyptic. There was a sound like the sky cracking in half, a sonic boom so powerful it physically threw Tashinori back several feet. The air in the chamber compressed, then exploded outwards, extinguishing their torch and plunging them into absolute darkness. The chamber itself groaned, the very foundations of the Sphinx shaking as a web of fractures spread from the point of impact. And then there was the pain. It was a clean, sharp, absolute agony that dwarfed even the ordeal of the inheritance. Izuku stared down at his arm in the sudden, disorienting blackness. He didn't need to see it to know what had happened. He had felt it. He had felt his bones, the radius and the ulna, shatter into dozens of pieces. He had felt his ligaments tear like wet papyrus. He had felt the muscles shred under the sheer, impossible force he had just unleashed. His arm was ruined. A wave of nausea and shock washed over him. The incredible power was matched only by the catastrophic price of using it. Gods above! Tashinori's voice was a shocked whisper in the dark. He relit the torch with a flint and steel from his pouch. The flickering light revealed the devastation. A huge, crater-like hole had been punched into the solid bedrock of the chamber wall. The wall itself was a spiderweb of cracks. But the more horrifying sight was Izuku's arm. It was a mangled, swollen ruin, bent at an angle that was sickeningly wrong, the skin already turning a deep, ugly shade of purple and black. Tashinori rushed to his side, his face a mask of grim concern and a flicker of something else, pride. What power! He murmured before shaking his head. We must get you to the healers. But listen to me, boy. This is your first and most important lesson. The Kavare is a loaded cannon. Your body, as it is now, is made of glass. If you try to fire the cannon, it will shatter you every single time. As the Meiji guards helped a pale, pain-racked Izuku back up the stairs and into the gentle light of the rising sun, the reality of his choice crashed down upon him. He had the power of a god, but using it would destroy him. The weeks that followed were a blur of agonizing pain and relentless rehabilitation. Under the guise of a terrible training accident, the finest healers in Thebes tended to his arm. Achiko, with her no gravitational heka, was instrumental, gently lifting his shattered limb so the bone setters could work without causing further damage. She asked no questions, but her wide, concerned eyes spoke volumes. During this time, the world moved on. The trial of Maat was declared inconclusive, with the Pharaoh announcing that the gods had not yet revealed a worthy champion. The nobles were in an uproar, but Tashinori's word was law. Katsuki was furious, his pride deeply wounded. He took to training with a terrifying new intensity, his explosions shaking the very foundations of his family's estate. Shoto retreated even further into his icy solitude, his father's disappointment a palpable aura around him. Once Izuku's arm had been set and bound, his true training began. Tashinori took him to a secluded, forgotten oasis deep in the western desert, a place of silent palms and a hidden spring, far from prying eyes. Your problem is one of control, Tashinori explained one morning, as Izuku gingerly flexed his newly healed, but still weak, fingers. You treated the power like a club, pouring 100% of it into a single point. You need to treat it like water from the Nile during the inundation. He picked up a dry clay cup from the ground. This cup is your body. One for all is the entire river. He made a gesture of dumping a massive amount of water. Pour the whole river in, and the cup shatters. But he then dipped the cup into an imaginary river, filling it gently. If you let just enough of the life-giving water flow into the vessel, it becomes full, strong, useful. Izuku's analytical mind latched onto the metaphor. So I need to irrigate my own body? Let the power flow through me, not just into one part of me. Tashinori beamed, a rare, full smile that made him look years younger. Precisely, my boy. You must let the ka flow through you. All of it, but only a tiny fraction of its total power. Let it fill you from the tips of your toes to the ends of your hair. A full-body reinforcement. I call it full cowling. 4 days, Izuku tried and failed. His first attempt to spread the power resulted in him breaking his left pinky toe. His next attempt gave him 2 black eyes as the power surged to his head too quickly. He kept a new scroll, a personal one, detailing every failure. Attempt 12, focused on 10% output. Result, sprained wrist. Power is too concentrated in the joints. Attempt 23, tried to visualize the power as water. Result, power surged to my legs, caused me to leap 50 feet in the air and crash into a palm tree. Severe bruising. Attempt 47, tried to activate only 1%. Result, nothing happened. Output too low to manifest physically. He was covered in bruises, his body aching constantly. But he never gave up. He muttered constantly, analyzing his own physiology, trying to find the mental key to unlock the control he so desperately needed. Tashinori watched him, never losing patience, offering advice, tending his wounds, and pushing him to his limits. Think of it like this, Tashinori said one afternoon, seeing Izuku's frustration mount. He held up a small, uncooked fish. If you want to cook this fish, you don't hit it with the full, concentrated power of Ra's sun disk. It will be vaporized. You need the gentle, ambient heat of a small cooking fire. Find your fire, boy, not the inferno. Just a tiny, controllable flame. That was the breakthrough. Not the inferno. That evening, as the sun set and painted the oasis in hues of orange and violet, Izuku sat cross-legged on a flat rock. He closed his eyes and reached for the power inside him. He didn't reach for the raging sun, the oceanic torrent. He searched for the tiny, flickering ember that was his own will, his own spirit, at the heart of the storm. He found it, and he gently fanned it, allowing it to draw a minuscule amount of fuel from the vast reservoir of the Kaavare. He felt a gentle warmth spread through him. He opened his eyes. Thin, intricate lines of emerald light were tracing paths across his skin, like glowing green hieroglyphs. The power wasn't exploding, it was flowing. A steady, controlled hum of energy filled him, a feeling of immense potential held perfectly in check. He felt strong, fast, alive in a way he had never imagined. He stood up. The emerald lines flared slightly brighter. He pushed off the ground in a small hop. He shot 30 feet into the air, did a perfect somersault, and landed on his feet as softly as a cat. He hadn't broken a thing. Tears of relief and joy streamed down Izuku's face. He looked at Tashinori, a triumphant, watery grin on his face. Tashinori's expression was one of immense pride. He placed a hand on Izuku's head. This is your first true step, young Midoriya. You have achieved 5%. From here, the path only gets harder, but you are on it. Their moment of triumph was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching through the dusk. One of the loyal Medjay guards rode into the oasis, his face grim. He dismounted and bowed low before Tashinori. My Lord Pharaoh, the guard said, his voice urgent. A messenger has arrived from the northern provinces. I came as fast as I could. Tashinori's face hardened. What is it? It's Governor Iniko of the Mitanub province, my lord. The guard reported, his voice dropping. He was found in his chambers this morning. His entire family, his personal guard, all of them. They are alive, but they are empty. Izuku felt a chill run down his spine, extinguishing the warm glow of his new power. His Heka? Tashinori asked, though he already knew the answer. The guard nodded grimly. Stolen. Every last one of them. The governor, he just sits and stares at the wall. They say he is a husk. The messenger said whispers were left on the lips of the terrorized servants before they fled into the desert. Tashinori stood tall, the setting sun casting his gaunt frame in a long dark shadow. What was the name they whispered? The guard looked from the dying pharaoh to the young, green-haired boy whose body was still faintly glowing with a divine, terrifying light. Achan. The return to Thebes was a jarring transition from the serene isolation of the desert oasis. Here, under the watchful eyes of the court, their secret training had to be confined to the dead of night in hidden palace courtyards. During the day, Izuku resumed the simple, unassuming life of a scribe's apprentice. He fetched pigments for his master, benipe, copied ledgers, and organized the scriptorium. He was a ghost in the grand machinery of the palace, a boy no one looked at twice, and that was their greatest advantage. But inside, Izuku was a world in turmoil. The Kaavare was a constant presence now, a low thrum of power that resonated in his bones. It was like living with a caged lion in his chest, a magnificent and terrifying creature that he had to keep soothed and leashed at all times. He practiced maintaining his 5% full cowling for longer and longer periods, the faint emerald lines on his skin becoming a second, secret skin that he learned to conceal beneath his linen robes. He could now move a heavy statue with a push, leap to the top of a wall without a sound, and read a scroll from across a vast hall with enhanced vision. He was becoming something more than human, and the secret of it was a crushing, isolating weight. The true challenge, however, came not when he was awake, but when he slept. His dreams were no longer his own. They were a chaotic, fragmented tapestry woven from the lives of the 8 souls who now resided within him. He would fall asleep as Izuku Midoriya, scribe of Thebes, and wake up in a different body, a different time. One night, he was Daigoro Banjo, the 5th wielder. He stood on the deck of a war barge, the spray of the Nile on his face, a broad grin splitting his features. He felt a boisterous, almost reckless courage that was completely alien to his own cautious nature. An enemy ship, bristling with pirates, pulled alongside them. Daigoro laughed, a hearty boom of a sound. He raised his hand, and from his palm, something black and whip-like, made of pure energy, shot out. It latched onto the mast of the pirate ship with a solid thwump. He pulled, and the immense force nearly capsized the enemy vessel, sending pirates screaming into the river. Izuku woke with a gasp, the phantom sensation of the energy whip still tingling in his arm, his heart pounding with a phantom thrill of battle. Another night, he was En, the 6th wielder. He was cloaked and hooded, moving through a slum ridden with a foul plague. He wasn't fighting enemies, he was hiding from them. The feeling was one of oppressive paranoia, of being hunted. He could feel the Heka devourer of his era, a subtle and insidious presence, always just out of sight. En's power manifested as a thick, dark smoke that billowed from his body, allowing him to obscure himself and vanish into the shadows. Izuku woke up shivering, the dream's cloying fear clinging to him like a shroud. The most frequent visitor was Nana Shimura, the 7th wielder, Toshinori's master. Her dreams were filled with a strange mixture of warmth and sorrow. He felt her boundless compassion as she used her Heka, float, to rescue a child who had fallen from a cliffside. He felt her fierce love for her student, a young, healthy Toshinori, full of boundless optimism. But he also felt the deep, aching pain of the sacrifices she had to make, the family she had to leave behind to protect them from her enemies. He woke from her dreams with tears on his cheeks, mourning people he had never met, feeling a loss that was not his own. These weren't just dreams, they were lessons. Fragments of memory, of emotion, of technique, all embedded within the Ka of Ra. The power was not just raw energy, it was an archive of heroism, a library of souls. Toshinori, when Izuku explained the visions in a hushed, frantic whisper, listened with a solemn nod. The Council of Past Ka. Toshinori confirmed, his voice low. The vestiges. Their consciousness is bound to the power. It is a sign that the Ka is truly beginning to merge with your spirit. They are accepting you. But it is also a warning. He looked at Izuku, his golden eyes full of a grave seriousness. Their lives were hard. Their deaths, for the most part, were violent. They fought the same shadow you are now destined to face. Listen to them. Learn from them. They are your ancestors in this sacred duty. The whispers of the past pharaohs were a constant companion, a source of guidance and a heavy burden. But the whispers in the present were far more dangerous. The news from the Mitanub province had spread through the court like a plague. Governor Iniko, once a vibrant and powerful man whose Heka could make crops grow from barren sand, was now a hollow-eyed shell. He had been brought to the capital for the priests to examine, and the diagnosis sent a fresh wave of terror through the noble houses. His Ka, his very life force, had been scooped out, leaving nothing behind. Aken, the Heka devourer, was no longer a myth or a distant threat. He was real, and his power was absolute. Panic was a fertile ground for ambition. And no one was more ambitious than General Enji, the Flame General, father of Shoto. Izuku first encountered him properly in the great hypostyle hall of the Karnak Temple. It was a forest of stone, a breathtaking chamber of 134 massive columns that held up the sky. Izuku was there on a scribe's errand, verifying an inscription. General Enji was there to make his presence known. He was a mountain of a man, even taller than Toshinori's divine form, with a physique carved from granite. A constant, searing heat radiated from him, and his bristling red hair and beard looked like flames frozen in a gale. His turquoise eyes burned with an intensity that could melt gold. His Heka, the Fury of Ra, was legendary, a power of hellish fire that had single-handedly won a dozen border wars. He was surrounded by a coterie of sycophantic junior officers, all of them listening with rapt attention as he held forth. "The Pharaoh is weak!" Enji's voice was a gravelly roar that echoed off the columns. He made no effort to keep his voice down. He wanted to be heard. This Akan preys upon our border provinces. And what is the response from the throne? Silence! Prayers! A ridiculous trial to find a champion that yields no result. We need action. We need a demonstration of strength that will burn this cult of weakness from our lands. His gaze swept the hall and, by sheer chance, landed on Izuku, who had frozen in place, trying to make himself as small as possible. Enji's fiery eyes narrowed. "You!" he barked. "The scribe's boy. The one who played the fool at the trial." Izuku felt 100 pairs of eyes turn to him. His blood ran cold. He bowed his head low. "General!" he squeaked. Enji strode toward him, his every step a thunderclap of authority. The heat coming off him was intense, making Izuku's skin prickle. "You are the one the Pharaoh praised for his heart. Tell me, boy, how will your heart stand against a man who can steal your very soul? How will your compassion stop an army of fanatics? The world is not changed by sentiment. It is forged in fire and power." Before Izuku could stammer a reply, a new presence entered the hall. The oppressive heat was instantly tempered by a wave of chilling cold. "Father!" The voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Shoto stood a few feet away, his bicolored hair a stark banner of his lineage. He had approached with the silence of a northern frost. His gaze was fixed on his father, but Izuku could feel the peripheral chill of his attention. "Shoto!" Enji grunted, turning to face his son. His expression was a mixture of pride and disappointment. "You should be training. The enemy grows stronger while you practice your fundamentals." "I have mastered the fundamentals," Shoto stated, his voice as cold as the ice he wielded. "You saw as much at the trial." There was a subtle accusation in his tone. "You showed control," Enji shot back, his voice rising again. "But you lacked overwhelming force. You were matched by the Bakugo boy's brute savagery. You are meant to be perfect, a masterpiece that surpasses all others, even the Pharaoh himself. Yet you hold back. You refuse to use your left side, my side, to its full potential. You disgrace my legacy with this petulant rebellion of yours." The tension between them was a physical thing, a battle of elemental forces. The air around them shimmered, hot and cold at once. Izuku was trapped in the middle, a terrified mouse between two warring gods. Shoto's gaze, for the first time, moved to Izuku. His heterochromatic eyes, one a cool gray-blue, the other a fiery turquoise, assessed him with a detached, clinical curiosity. There was no malice in his look, but there was a deep, ingrained suspicion. "He is the one you are worried about, father?" Shoto asked, his tone laced with a faint, chilling irony. "The unblessed scribe? You believe the Pharaoh would truly choose this over me?" The dismissal was more cutting than any of Katsuki's insults. To Shoto, Izuku wasn't even a rival. He was an anomaly, an absurdity that defied the cold logic of his world, a world where power and bloodline were the only things that mattered. He saw Izuku not as a person, but as a symptom of the Pharaoh's supposed weakness and decline. Enji scoffed. "Do not be a fool. The boy is a distraction. A parable. The Pharaoh grows old and sentimental. But when the time comes, power will be the only thing that matters, and you will be ready to claim it." He jabbed a thick finger at Shoto's chest. "Now come. We are done here." The general swept out of the hall, his entourage of officers scrambling to follow. Shoto gave Izuku one last, lingering, unreadable look before turning and following his father, a silent, unwilling glacier in the wake of a volcano. Izuku was left trembling, his scribe's board clutched to his chest like a shield. He had just witnessed the raw, dysfunctional ambition that was festering at the very heart of the Pharaoh's court. Enji wasn't just a loyal general, he was a kingmaker, positioning his son to seize power. And Shoto, for all his cold rebellion, was the centerpiece of that plan. They were a threat not just to Izuku, but to Tashinori and the entire fragile peace of the two lands. The encounter left Izuku deeply shaken. He retreated to the relative safety of the palace's grand library, a vast repository of scrolls stacked to the high ceilings, the air thick with the scent of aging papyrus. He needed to lose himself in his work, to focus on something other than the crushing weight of his secret and the dangerous politics of the court. He was supposed to be cross-referencing royal lineages, but his mind kept drifting back to his dreams, to the whispers of the past. He thought of Daigoro Banjo, the fifth wielder, and the black, whip-like energy he had summoned. It had been so effortless, so instinctive in the dream. A tool born of necessity. Was it possible? Could he access their Heka? Tashinori had never mentioned such a thing. He had only spoken of the stockpiled strength and speed. Was this a new development, something unique to his generation of the Kaavare? He needed to try. Finding a secluded alcove behind a towering stack of scrolls on ancient irrigation techniques, he took a deep, centering breath. He activated full cowling, the familiar emerald lines tracing their paths over his skin. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the dream. He focused on the feeling, the boisterous confidence, the sensation of reaching out, of grasping. He pictured the black tendrils, imagined them coiled in his arm, ready to strike. He held out his hand toward a heavy bronze brazier a few feet away. "Come on," he pleaded internally. "Reach out. Grasp." Nothing happened. He tried again, gritting his teeth, pouring more of his will into it. He felt a strange tingling in his arm, a flicker of something dark and unfamiliar, but it wouldn't coalesce. It was like trying to remember a word that was on the tip of his tongue. The harder he tried to force it, the more it slipped away. Frustration mounted. He was failing. He had this incredible power, this library of abilities locked inside him, and he couldn't find the key. Katsuki's taunts, Enji's dismissal, Shoto's cold stare, they all echoed in his head. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was just a foolish boy playing at being a hero. He was so lost in his own failure that he didn't hear the footsteps approaching. Having trouble? Izuku yelped and spun around, instantly deactivating full cowling. His heart leaped into his throat. Standing there, leaning against a pillar with a weary but knowing smile, was Tashinori. He was in his gaunt form. A simple scribe's robe hung over his skeletal frame. "And my lord!" Izuku stammered, bowing so low his head nearly touched his knees. "I was just stretching," Tashinori chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Stretching? It looked more like you were trying to telepathically reprimand that brazier. Let me guess. Daigoro Banjo?" Izuku's jaw dropped. "How did you know?" "Because I had the same dreams," Tashinori said, his expression turning nostalgic. "The black whip, yes? I spent years trying to manifest it. I never could. My theory is that the Kaavare has reached a point of singularity. It has stockpiled so much energy that it is now unlocking the original Heka of the past wielders. You, my boy, are a new chapter in this power's history. You may be the first to wield more than just its strength and speed." He pushed himself off the pillar and walked over to Izuku. "But you are trying to force it. That is not the way. These powers are not tools in a box for you to simply pick up. They are extensions of the spirits who first wielded them." Daigoro was a straightforward, almost brutally simple man. He saw a problem and he reached out to grab it. "You are overthinking it. You are trying to analyze it into existence." He gestured to the brazier. "Try again. But this time, don't think. Don't analyze. Don't even try to succeed. Just feel. Feel an instinctive need to connect with it. To grasp it." Izuku looked at the brazier, then back at Tashinori. He felt a sudden, unexpected surge of emotion. It was gratitude, so overwhelming it almost brought him to tears. This great man, this dying god, was putting all of his hope, all of his faith, into him. He wasn't just a student, he was a legacy. And in that moment, Izuku felt a desperate, visceral need to not let him down, to prove that his faith was not misplaced. It was an instinctive need. A need to grasp the future. He raised his arm. He didn't focus on the technique. He focused on the feeling, on his bond with Tashinori, on the heavy weight of their shared duty. And from the back of his hand, a thin, black tendril of pure, solid energy, no thicker than a reed pen, erupted with a faint snap. It shot across the short distance, and wrapped itself neatly around the leg of the bronze brazier. Izuku stared, his eyes wider than dinner plates. He had done it. It was thin, weak, and wavering, but it was real. He could feel it, a tangible connection between himself and the object. It felt natural, like flexing a muscle he never knew he had. Tashinori's eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and unadulterated pride. He let out a breathless laugh. Heavens above! You did it! You actually did it! The tendril dissolved into black motes of light as Izuku's concentration broke. He stared at his hand, then at his mentor, a huge, disbelieving grin spreading across his face. He had done it! He had unlocked the first whisper. Their shared moment of triumph was shattered by a sudden commotion from the main hall of the library. A royal guard, his face pale and his chest heaving from a hard run, burst through the entrance. He scanned the room frantically, his eyes landing on Tashinori. Even in his disguised form, the Pharaoh commanded an innate authority. The guard ran toward them, stumbling to a halt and bowing low. "My lord! Forgive the intrusion! An urgent message from the city garrison!" Tashinori was instantly transformed. The proud mentor vanished, replaced by the grim, weary king. "What is it, man? Speak!" The guard swallowed hard, his voice trembling with fear. "There has been an incident. At the barracks of the Pharaoh's personal guard, one of the sentries on the evening watch. He was found wandering the streets in a daze an hour ago." Izuku's newfound joy evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. He is unblessed now, my lord," the guard stammered, his eyes wide with horror. "His Heka is gone. They found him near the western gate, babbling. He could only say one thing. One name, over and over." Tashinori's face became a mask of stone. He already knew the name. The shadow had fallen not on some distant province, but on their very doorstep. The enemy was inside the gates. The guard looked at Tashinori, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "He said Aiken?"